Assalamu alaikum. I thought perhaps I would mention something again today that is often misunderstood in our world, with the reminder, both to me and to all of us, to perhaps close one's eyes and ears to militant media, to programming and propaganda, and instead to seek primary sources and to seek deeper into what perhaps are places of truth. And in the river of such truth, there's another word that bears defining, and that word today is jihad. What is jihad? What does it really mean? And before I move into its meaning in the Middle East, in Quran, in that lineage, which is a very beautiful and very high lineage if you go to study the primary sources, I mention one of my early references to what I now know as that. And it happened when I was reading the Bhagavad Gita. And I recall the story of Arjuna, and much of the story of the Gita takes place on a battlefield. And I remember being so frustrated because my inner self does not consciously like fighting, although I beg to differ about that now, knowing this self more. That in exasperation on seeing another holy book talking about war, I threw the book across the room. If you look in the stories of the Old Testament, there's a lot of fighting. And if you go to the New Testament, to the words of Jesus, Isa, as he's known in the Middle East, there is a certain sentence that used to capture me. It would say, strive to enter rest. What does that mean? Strive to enter rest. Anyone who's ever made a New Year's resolution knows exactly what that means. Anyone who has set an intention to go on a course, on a path, anyone who has perhaps decided to pick up a cleaner way of eating, who has decided to go on a diet or to stop smoking. You might think you're in rest until you make such an intention. You find quite the battle sometimes in the self. Even sometimes we set intentions. Some lineages practice meditation. Strive to be still. See what happens. This is the meaning of jihad. Jihad is the war within the self, the war to come into union within the self. And in Eastern practices, they talk about, and I studied a little bit of acupuncture and Eastern modalities. You talk about the organs, and even within the body. And within that system, the king in the body is in the heart. And all is meant to come under the dominion of the king. And that means the mind needs to serve the heart. And this is the meaning of jihad as well. It's the same idea. You start to see these things all over the world. And so there's a greater war and a lesser war. When you finish the lesser war, you go into the greater war. And ultimately, it is about the surrender of the ego, the surrender of our lower nature that wants to do whatever it wants, the surrender to initially maybe higher principles, an intellect that will say maybe it's a good idea to raise up early. Maybe it's a good idea to go for a run, even if I don't feel like it. Maybe it's a good idea to do some homework or work on that book that I feel to write. Even though there's a lower part of me that doesn't want to. Maybe it's a good idea to eat those vegetables or something instead of an extra portion of cake. This is a form of jihad. The greater form of jihad is surrendering all of the self. Once the noise leaves, to that still small voice within. And that can be a lifelong journey. It is the journey of the being. It is the journey of the soul in this life. It is the journey to come with into union. Spirit, soul, body, all is one. All in complete surrender to the divine. And that happening in times of stillness, in times of peace, and in times when there is great war and great chaos going without. These are the levels of one becoming a master. And that is why all of the great books speak about a jihad. It is not because it's not about the beheading and all of this. It's about an inner thing. And certainly baser beings and baser levels of consciousness have taken that into very dense forms of being. And we've taken it into, I suppose, what the West could call heresies. But it's all about the level of being that is reading and learning and receiving these transmissions. And so I leave this here just to kind of leave a jewel that in some of these places where we have been taught our very base, there are also very, very, very high and very refined teachings. And so to perhaps pause before one assumes. And for those seeking, for those looking for the pure water, for those looking for the way, to know that it can be found in some of these desert lands, in some of these ancient waters, in these beautiful lineages. Salam alaikum.